Diaz-McGregor 2 in Vegas. The Vice President of PR for the UFC, Dave Sholler, was there, and he joins us now with the fallout from that night. We have a poll question up on our Twitter page at Mike Gill Show asking who won the fight. It seems like the fans agree that McGregor won the fight. Would you, if you were scoring it, Sholler, would you have gone McGregor or Diaz?
I thought McGregor won the fight, Mike, and thanks for having me on. I thought he won 3-2. I thought, he pretty decisively won a couple of those rounds. But, here's the situation. These guys will forever go down in history, kind of etched in stone together. Bad blood, rivalry, drama. And ultimately, when you look at their two fights, the first one from March and then the last one from Saturday night, just really, really epic fights. These are the type of fights that you hope to have when you have such a massive audience watching. And those guys, in my opinion, easily a contender of fight of the year, if not one of the best fights of all time.
I mean, these guys came at each other. You can't ever say that there was a lack of action in that fight. They both came at each other. Now, the big question really in this one is what's next for the guys? I mean, it was a great fight, and you could go back and forth on who won and who didn't. Was it a draw? And in the back of your mind as you're watching it, which kind of stinks when you're watching things like this, is, well, of course the UFC wants McGregor to win. It sets up a third fight. But McGregor afterwards was pretty adamant that if this fight's going to happen, that Diaz is going to come down. And I heard Diaz said he would go down to 155. So is that the obvious next move for you guys?
Well, I think if you listen to Dana White's post-fight interview with Fox and a couple other outlets, he'll tell you that, in his eyes right now, Conor McGregor's next fight will either have to be defending his 145-pound title or potentially entertaining a fight at 155 pounds. I don't know that fight is going to be an immediate rematch. That might be one that plays out either late in the year or next year. But we usually come back up for air on Tuesdays or Wednesdays after a big fight like that. Let some of the dust settle. Let the guys involved in big fights like that go home and get reacclimated to life. But right now, my thought process is Conor's probably going to have to defend that 45-pound title. If you think about it, he has had that title since last July, and he has yet to defend it because obviously he's had some big fights in the way. So with that 45-pound division a little bit on hold from a championship perspective, my gut would be he either defends that belt or gives it up. But make no mistake, Mike, a third fight between Diaz and McGregor is going to be massive whenever it happens, and I think both of those guys prove that when you put Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor in the octagon, you just can't predict what's going to happen.
So your gut would tell you those two will fight a third time?
My gut tells me somewhere down the road that score will be settled. It's just too important for both of those guys. And listen, if you scored that fight for Nate Diaz, I couldn't sit here and argue too bad against you. It was a really close fight, and there were points in the card where it looked like, hey, McGregor's going to finish Diaz. Diaz is going to finish McGregor. It was wall-to-wall, and you went into that fifth round probably holding your breath saying, I have no idea what's going to happen. It was a classic UFC battle.
Let me tell you, Dave, let me tell you, I'm watching the fight, sitting next to people who are really into it. And, I'm casual. I'll admit I'm casual. I'm getting more and more acclimated. But there was a part in that fight when I looked at the guy next to me and said, Diaz is done. And 10 minutes later, I said, dude, McGregor's out of gas, man. He is out of gas. So you're right. I mean, and realistically, if you told me Diaz won, I wouldn't argue. If you told me McGregor won, if you told me it was a draw, I just thought it was a great fight overall, which is why it was such a great fight, because you could go either side. You could make an argument either way. You could even said draw. I think people would have been okay with that.
It's why we watch sports. It's for the entertainment. It's for the edge of the seat value. And we all want to see a bit of resiliency. And we saw that in this fight. I can't think of a fight where you saw two more resilient fighters in the octagon. There were times in that fight where Conor looked like he was completely spent. Nate Diaz was knocked down 3 times in one round. And in many other situations, fighters of this caliber would have been finished. It just had everything we look for, that high drama, the resilience, and a little bit of grit. And you know what, Mike, at the end of the day, what I love to see the most, and I know the bad blood is still there, it will still be there for the third fight, but at the end of that 5th round, they embraced almost as if to say, you know what, we did this together and we'll do it again, but for this moment in time, hats off to you.
Dave Sholler is the Vice President of Public Relations for UFC 202. Anthony Johnson, you said this is why we watch. Well, if you were watching for that fight, you probably didn't. You weren't too happy. It was 13 seconds. He dusted Teixeira there, and then afterwards, I thought was very classy in the way they said, "Yo, that's not boo Cormier because he's very good. He has everything he deserves, but I want to fight you next." So, are we going to see that in New York?
I don't know if it'll happen in New York, but my gut says that will be the next fight we see. John Jones is still going through the adjudication process related to his potential anti-doping violation from UFC 200. There appears to be a little light at the end of the tunnel of that process, but what he did, what Anthony Rumble Johnson did on Saturday night in 13 seconds, dusting, as you said, a guy who was really, really hard to finish, a proven veteran of the sport, a knockout artist in his own right. There was some footage circulated before the fight of Anthony Johnson going through his normal pre-fight routine, and he hit that uppercut punch about 10 times in his pre-fight routine that he does. So if you watch that online from his coach Henry Hooft, and then you see him put it into action in the actual fight, just one of the most beautiful, crisp knockout punches you'll ever see. That is what makes Anthony Johnson dangerous in this division. He's one of those guys, whether it's with his left hand, left foot, right foot, he has the ability for you to blink and the fight to be over.
And it was over very quickly. It was, I believe, the moment of the night for the UFC 202. The fight of the night went to McGregor and Nate Diaz, who Nate Diaz, I mean, afterwards I watched all the post stuff, and then I saw kind of a one-off with him kind of claiming he was injured, that he got hurt in training, but that he would never pull out of a fight. So you got all sorts of storylines setting up for the next match. But you mentioned where McGregor might go. Where does Diaz go? Because now it sounds like he's at the point where he says, if you want to put my name on a card, you're going to have to come up with some big money.
And that's exactly what Nate Diaz more or less said in his post-fight interviews. Listen, I think he badly wants a third fight. I won't rule out the fact that he could potentially fight in between. We'll start discussing that later in the week, but I know where his head is at right now, and it's about the rubber match. And for a lot of our fans, I could see why that would be incredibly appealing. And if Conor wasn't a champion of another weight class, you'd probably get that rubber match right away. But what I like to do with Nate Diaz is give him time, let him heal up. He did suffer a pretty significant cut in that fight, and he was banged up heading into the fight. He obviously informed us all of that after the fight, that he was having a little trouble with his knee and his rib, and this is the type of sport, a contact sport, where no different than what you probably see in the NFL training camp. If you can get close to 100% for that game time, you're already ahead of the curve. It's a contact sport, it's a combat sport, and if that wasn't Nate at 100%, I can't wait to see what it's like when he is 100% in that third fight. But to answer your question directly, I think he's going to come up for air the next couple of weeks and figure out what his next move is, and some of it is going to be predicated off of what happens with Conor McGregor.
He's got a lot of facial swelling. He's going to need to take a little break for a while to get to him. I got to imagine he's hurting in the face this week here. Dave Scholler's with us. I didn't get a chance to talk to you leading into this fight because I was on vacation, but Lesnar, I think, had more action last night than he did in the UFC fight. Did you see him last night?
I did not watch SummerSlam, but then I saw some of the viral moments that were created. And the one question that I keep seeing circulated from my buddies in the pro wrestling world is whether that was a shoot or a work or whatever those phrases he used. I'll tell you what, it was a hell of an elbow. Whatever it was a hell of an elbow.
Orton needed 10 staples to shut his head.
Yeah, listen, I think Brock probably blew through the stop sign there. When he was supposed to deliver that elbow, I think he blew right through the stop sign.
I'll tell you, in your event, he seemed like such a gracious, well-behaved guy. Last night, he looked like he had complete disregard for, now, you never, like you said, you don't know if it's a shoot or work or whatever. But boy, oh boy, it was like, dude, I got into a real fight and I couldn't unload. I'm going to unload on this dude right here because he's not trained.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I know you're a big follower of WWE and rightfully so, but I thought blood wasn't allowed anymore. I thought that was something they kind of got away from.
On television, they'll stop the fight right on live TV. They'll stop the fight and clean it up. On a pay-per-view event, they're a little bit more open to allow that to happen. So this was a pay-per-view event last night. It's not on live television. Where on the live TV events, they'll stop the fight right there and clean them up. Oh, they were trying to clean it up last night. He took the doctor and threw him across the ring. It was pretty unbelievable.
Listen, that's a whole new thing for Suplex City. I'm not familiar with that.
Orton looked at him like, dude, really? What are you doing to me here? Your next one will involve Phil Brooks, a.k.a. CM Punk, and he's going to be one of the guys on that card on September the 10th, 203. This is have you seen a fight get so much attention for a guy who has no experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a bit of an anomaly in terms of the experience, but Phil has earned that right through his incredible accomplishments in the WWE. You know, as far as media attention, it reminds me a bit of when James Toney came and fought Randy Couture. There's just so many curious new fans that want to see how Phil is going to do. If you want a little insight into Phil's journey, tonight on FS1, we have the second episode of Evolution of Punk. It's our documentary behind his transition from pro wrestling to the world of mixed martial arts. I think it's a fascinating look. It airs tonight at 9:30 your time, Mike. It's a fascinating look at his transition. I'll tell you this. He trains alongside two people in this business that I really, really trust. One of the top trainers in the world, Duke Rufus, and then former lightweight champion Anthony Pettis, who actually fights this weekend on Big Fox in his featherweight debut. And they said this guy is absolutely busting his tail to be successful. He's working hard 3 times a day in the gym, and I speak to him once or twice a day. I know where his head's at, and when you talk about determination, he's one of those guys. You can see why he's been so successful. The points at which other people would quit or tap out, he's not that guy. He's, you know, speaking of blowing through stop signs, he's the type of guy that's going to push his body past the point of no return. And I think, you know, you talk about a guy in Mickey Gall, a Jersey guy himself, who he's going to fight. My bet is that Phil's going to open some eyes on September 10th against a very tough Mickey Gall. Mickey's a kid who at 24 years old has a chance to be a big star in this sport. It's just the perfect storm. You know, you talk about the debut of CM Punk against a young up-and-comer like Mickey Gall. It's there's a reason all the eyeballs are coming out for this one.
All right, we'll preview that card coming up later with Dave. Good stuff. Saturday night, very entertaining. If you didn't see the fight, find it somewhere because it was worth it. The 5 rounds, full of action, nonstop. Diaz and McGregor. It was awesome. Sholler, enjoyed it, pal.
I appreciate you, Mike. Thanks.
You got it. Dave Sholler, the Vice President of Public Relations for the USC, local guy, EHT High School. Always good to get his insight